I can't help but be impressed by the magnitudes. The lower threshold is 10-year improvement, and the higher threshold, the stretch is 20-year.
Oh, so you don't, Tom, you don't know the fight you've had.
And it does stand to reason that if your muscles are in good shape, if your brain is in good shape, and if your immune system is in good shape, so you're not getting sick, you may not live forever, but you're doing pretty darn well. You're doing pretty darn well. You're on the side of, let's go with 2% gain or something like that.
I was like five.
Yeah. Okay.
5 years across 3. Boom, fireworks, amazing. And
and to your defense in that position, that would be an extraordinary population level event.
It would be an extraordinary change.
Welcome back to the Human Life Expectancy channel. I'm your host, Tom Nodine. And you've probably heard that XPrize recently created a 7-year, $101 million global competition to revolutionize the way we approach human aging. Well, today we're speaking with Jamie Justice, the EVP of Health Domain at the XPrize Foundation, an adjunct professor at Wake Forest University School of Medicine, who is leading the competition. And I'm thrilled to have her join us today. Jamie, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. It's really nice to be here, and I really appreciate the introduction. And thanks everybody who's joining.
Thank you. Well, Jamie, you may know that this channel has covered the historical doubling of human life expectancy since 1900. And we personally think that's one of the least or most uncelebrated achievements that humanity has created. And so we want to celebrate that, but we also can't stop thinking about the future, right? So we look deeply into new technologies and what the impacts of those technologies might be on longevity. And so when the Healthspan XPrize came about, our eyes bugged up in a big way, and we're extremely thrilled about the prize and to have you here. As I mentioned, we look very closely at a whole range of technologies, and I'd love to just kind of pick your mind a little bit about, what those technologies are and all of that stuff. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Let's just start straight back with the simple things. Can you please tell us about the competition and how you came to be involved?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So the competition is, it really is, it's a first of its kind, is that XPrize Foundation, this is in our DNA, right? We run really large scale competitions. It's a little bit different than what you would think about for a traditional grant funding or how a lot of science gets funded or approached, is we actually, we try to drive capital towards innovation in any field, anything from space to rainforests to even carbon removal. And, our founder, Peter Diamandis, has a huge interest in healthspan and lifespan. And he's both a practitioner, an investor, and a thought leader in that space. And so he did a lot of the hard work even before I joined, is to generate a lot of interest, pull people together to put together really an unprecedented prize purse tacked to the end of this. So, partnered with Healthspan Foundation, which is another really major global foundation leading the way in aging and geroscience research, which geroscience, of course, is looking at that aging biology for novel therapeutic solutions that underlie not just one, but many different diseases. And so Healthspan has been leading a space there. They came out around the same time, partnered with Peter, create this prize. And my role, quite simply, was to come in and lead it, actually put a framework around it. This is directly what I was already doing in my academic life as a scientist. And so I'd been leading early stage translational trials up to phase 3 clinical trials, including the trial targeting aging with metformin, which I worked on behind the scenes for about 8 to 10 years with the executive committee for that, which was designed as a way to try to create a regulatory framework for drug development in aging. That trial never started, but it doesn't mean that the lessons that we learned and the work that we did there was really transformative. And many of the networks for me were informative of what we needed to do for this prize. Is that, my entire work, my scientific life was around this question of, if you did have a therapeutic that could fundamentally change the way we age, how would we even know? Is that
Yeah.
that's a question we can ask in mice? We know how to answer it in flies. We can even think about it with non-human primates and dogs. But when it comes to humans, like you said, we have this huge blind spot that we assume that we've lived as long as we live, and we always have, but it's just in the last few generations. And when we're looking at things with the kind of time course of aging, is that we don't have really great frameworks about how to address that, how to measure it, how do you monitor it, how do you develop. And so that's my passion area. And so I was given the not small task to come in and lead this as a global effort rather than thinking one trial at a time, and start thinking about the field as a whole. What would you do? How would you do it? And rally people together to both create the frameworks, develop guidelines, pull together the science, but more than that, really invite people from around the world to compete. Is that by competing, we collaborate and build the field together. And so that's sort of the impetus behind these competition models, right? Is that it's not really just to crown a winner; it's actually to get everyone to the starting line,
Yeah.
and actually drive and create together. So the only way we're going to do this is by collaborating at a scale that we've never done before, and that the competition is a vehicle to get us there.
That's fantastic. I had the pleasure of meeting Peter Diamandis many years ago at Singularity University. And in fact, he was one of the people that inspired me to go on with the business that I now have, which is Human Life Expectancy, Inc. So kudos to him and kudos to you.
Yeah.
And also kudos to the XPrize competition. I believe I understand that the competition is a much more efficient way to attract capital to this important objective that we both share. Can you tell us a little more about that and the leverage that's involved?
Yeah. So, I mean, looking at it again, I came from a really traditional scientific background, right? Where you got to source money, you got to get funds, and then you do the work and you do the thing. And that's great for funding one study at a time. And we can put money towards programs to try to ask people to collaborate. But I mean, really, until you have a tangible goal, it's really hard to get people together and to actually get people sort of steering in the same direction. And so competitions are really unique, is that we put the incentive, you put the money at the point of demonstration. And so it's really unlike anything else, where it's like, yes, there's so much effort, there's so much to do, but you're incentivizing the goal that we're all trying to get to. And so in doing that, you really open the field. We end up crowdsourcing solutions. It ends up being, in my experience in working with XPrize, I think it really is probably the most useful impact for dollars spent. And so that's really the competition model and the goal. And that we're trying to apply it for the first time at Healthspan and Lifespan, which there have been some small prizes in the past. There was a mouse prize that was done to try to, if you can increase the life of a mouse. There was a prize that was initiated by the National Academies of Medicine, but again, a much smaller award, but with much shorter sort of turnaround. Is that we actually had the time, the space, the money, and the buy-in to do a global competition at a scale that's never been heard of. So again, that 101 million, it's actually 111 million, because we do have a $10 million bonus prize for persons who are aging with particular genetic condition called FSHD. So technically 111. And if anybody has ideas for bonus prizes that could still accompany it, I would love to have something around biomarkers. That door is still open. So, it's not one prize to win them all, but you can really leverage the structure to create pull in many different areas that are needed to create a commercial space around aging, health span, longevity.
That's great. And I believe I've heard Peter say many times that the XPrize approach is one that gives us almost 30 times leverage on the money that's put in. So rather than just investing in one that you think might be the winner, you end up investing in 30 times as much and only put the money in for the true winner.
For the one. And what it does, that it's also really unique. Again, Peter's right. And we have a group within XPrize that's our, they call it P&I, Partnerships and Impact. And they just went through and they did a historical record of the 30 years of XPrizes and what's happened. And they've actually put numbers to that. And they found, because at first we were like, oh, well, it's 10x. You can do 10x the investment in terms of what gets invested for the teams to compete and turn around. And that's where they came up with the 30 times. They said, no, actually, before they put numbers on it, we were underselling the impact of the competition model.
Yeah.
Is that, that the impact that comes through, because again, we incentivize at the point of demonstration. So it's out at the end. It's a really big, exciting carrot for people to chase. And that we bring together investors and funders. We say, okay, well, this is the area we're going after. These are the teams that are coming in. They need capital. They need investors. They need funding, whether it's from grants, foundations, philanthropic individuals, no question on where that needs to come from. And that we try to bring people together in sort of a matchmaking way. So it serves almost like an incubator to try to get stuff going. And so as opposed to a traditional funding model, which I'd always worked in and is great and is very necessary, is that, like you said, you're not just trying to incentivize a particular team, you're incentivizing an area. And so in this way, by getting investors, funders, and others really focused on this space, generating the frameworks and the finish line for where they need to go in order to win additional money, and doing that, we actually end up pulling together an entire commercial field, commercial area into the, so that you can actually have a stable structure and a runway for teams once they finish the prize, because winning's one thing, but the idea of winning is that you still have to go on and demonstrate that in a regulatory facing trial. You still have to be able to commercialize at the back end. And if we just funded one at a time, we'd never get there. That's what we've been trying, and it hasn't worked. And so this is the idea. If we want to create change, this is, odds on for impact, both driving investment, creating frameworks. I now have teams coming in, and I finally have enough evidence that I need to bring back to the FDA to say, okay, there are a lot of people going after this. And to tell our bureaucratic and our regulators, whether it's FDA or EMA or others, to say, it will be more work for you if you don't create guidelines than if you do. We now have numbers and evidence to put behind that. We just finished our registration, and the response from the global teams has been overwhelming.
That's great. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is this not the largest XPrize ever?
Oh, we got beat, Tom.
No. What could be more important than extending lifespan?
So I'm competitive.
Yeah, me too.
Give me another bonus prize so we could become the winner again. I want it. I want it bad. And so when we launched, we were the number one. So there was $100 million prize in carbon removal that was funded. We came in at 101 to beat them so we could be the biggest. And then we actually still had another $10 million bonus. So technically 111. And so we held that until until in 2024, there was a prize launched on water desalination. And so it's a water scarcity prize, and it is now, they funded at $119 million for a team who could develop tech at scale and at cost to desalinate water. And we're talking about scale. I mean, it's the scale. Can you have a city that is run on desalinated water? So, I mean, this is really, it's a huge and impactful prize, and there's a lot that goes into it. So they beat us. So for anybody listening out there, 9 million more, and we're back to number one.
That's great. Well, water, of course, is extremely important to all life on Earth. So I can understand that. I can understand that. But I, like you, and my company, we definitely focus on life expectancy and increasing health span. And so, and actually, another thing you were talking about the ecosystem really that gets built with this type of a prize. I want to highlight another aspect of that. We'll talk about the specific types of interventions that may be a part of the solution, but it seems plausible to me that the solution would be a combination. It might be a combination of behavioral or lifestyle changes, as well as medical and scientific interventions that might be more breakthrough in nature.
Oh, absolutely. And so, and we're seeing everything. If I could put on my magic hat and go back in time, to a year ago when we were rolling this out and launching it, is with our advisors and our endpoints committee, we made a conscious decision to not distinguish between modalities. right? So anyone can come in with any idea, and what we needed more than anything else was proof of concept.
Mm-hmm.
Is that I didn't care if it was a combination. I don't care if it's a monotherapy. I don't care if it's plasma-based, cell-based, a traditional pharmacologic intervention, repurposed drugs. We just needed point of demonstration. Everyone plays on the same field. Okay, and we made that decision. It was a good decision, and I still think it's relevant. But as my applications have come in, is that I've started really looking at them, and out of, again, we ended up with within the primary registration phase, we had 602 global teams that registered. Out of those, we had about 226 teams that submitted a qualifying submission, so like a 12-page technical submission that goes to our judges that really describes their team, describes their innovation, talks about the clinical center or environment in which they're going to test it. And we're getting right now, as I've read every single one of those, every page of every application that came in, I read over the last month, and have started doing data extraction to get an innovation landscape. Like, what are people actually doing who are actually at the point of translation? There's a lot that's being done in mice. There's a lot that's being done in worms. So all wonderful work and absolutely essential. But who's ready to take that into the clinic? And so when I'm looking at our innovation landscape about what these therapeutics are and where they're being demonstrated, those that are right next to clinical testing, is that I have about 40% monotherapies, right? So this, any category, it could be a vaccine. We could be looking at T-cell therapies. This could be novel stem cell-based approaches. We have a few gene therapies that are really exciting, and RNA-based therapeutics. We have novel drugs. We have repurposed drugs. And so that monotherapy is that there is one agent that they are testing, and that they can titrate it, they can dose it, they can personalize it, whatever it is, but it's one drug. We next have a category, so that's about 40%. We have a category of about 18% of our teams that are doing like a targeted combination. So that I have a really hypothesis-driven approach where I have this drug A, drug B putting together. Or I have drug A that is great in cognitive and immune. I don't know if it's really going to hit muscle, so I'm going to couple it with exercise. But it's 1+. And so just two things together, or a very targeted. We're also seeing like senolytic combinations, is that drug approach, can target these type of cells. This drug targets these kind of cells. I put them together. I have an additive or a synergistic effect. And so that's, again, targeted therapies, about 18%. And then I have another category of about 30% of my teams that are multimodals. This is exactly what you talked about. Personalized approaches. And it could be everything and nothing. We have diet, we have circadian-based interventions, we have exercise paradigms of different types. I have some community-based therapies, including entire communities. So how would you build an age-friendly community? And that it's a very much a public health-focused application. As people are going to go live there and they're going to do this thing. I also have, other groups that are crossing, that they might have a clinic, right? So a longevity medicine clinic, some other preventive medicine or proactive health clinics, and that they're saying, okay, I know how to personalize this. When I have patient A come in, I look at their biomarkers and this is our approach, and that they have this very dedicated approach, not just throwing everything at them, but like they really have a plan. I have this person, I read their biomarkers, I add drug A, drug B, this supplement program, and we adjust their diet in this way. Very intelligent choices, and that they monitor and titrate over that year, and that their goal is that by doing this, and they have to have like a very much a dedicated approach that has to be used. And so again, those are our multimodals. The others, we got about 11-12% that have any number of things. It could be a different device. It could be an AI screening platform or biomarker that's not quite an intervention, but they're like saying, this is how I think we'll get there in 2 years, kind of thing. And so that's another category in its own. So if I had to go back in time, use my magic wand, and say, okay, out of the 101 million, I'm going to give breakdowns to these different categories, because I could really see the commercial runway for these approaches are really different. The investors, the users, the application, is that the way we've designed it, they're all going to compete head to head. but that they may end up having very different but synergistic effects. And so I could have gone back and maybe awarded each one separate, like, this group gets this much money, this group, the winner gets this much money. And our judges could still go back and choose to do that. Or by the competition model, the reason we didn't do this is the idea, right, is that these multimodal clinics might meet the monotherapy teams. Maybe in the course of competition over the next semifinals period, maybe they merge, maybe they adopt, maybe they do something, and that they choose to put theirs together as like, this clinic really knows how to deliver an adherence. And they know how to do this. And that this company has this repurposed drug that's just dynamite and could fit right in there. Maybe they'll merge and do something magic together that we've not been able to accomplish alone. So again, this is one of the magic parts about competitions, is that they really are, I've heard somebody else call them cooperaticians, is that people that are going to win might not be a single company. It might be those who can get really intelligent about how to put themselves together.
I think it's such a beautiful model in that it inspires that type of collaboration. I've always felt that collaboration is deeply underappreciated as a true differentiator for businesses and for recipes for success.
Absolutely.
But I realize I've gotten a bit ahead of myself here. Can I take you back a little bit and ask you what the specific requirements are for winning the prize?
You're right. We never went there, did we? Thank you for bringing me back. Right. So the competition, again, this is a 7-year prize. It is a global competition. And we have 2 milestones and 1 grand prize. So the first milestone we're in right now, this is that qualifying submission. Our top 40 teams are going to each get $250,000 to do next stage testing. Other teams that are qualified can still continue. Even if they're not the top 40, they can still continue. And we're open for late registration. So the next milestone point is 2026. Any team who wants to be considered for finals, whether they're their top 40s or new teams or merged teams, whatever that is, they put in their finals application. They have to give us de-identified data that shows us that they are in clinic and that they are able to recruit subjects and that they can get their regulatory paperwork together. And we're going to award the top 10 of those $1 million. The $1 million will help support them into their 1-year clinical trials. We give them a protocol book and a data management system. Those teams are going to be running trials in about 100 people. They're going to be entering their data in. We'll be collecting biospecimens, and we'll be able to run biomarkers for them as well. And then at the end of that period, we're actually looking at their data, and we're doing it on an individualized response threshold. And that for each person that enters those trials, right, that they're either going to be a responder or a non-responder, but that they have to show that they have improved measures of muscle function, cognitive function, and immune function. Not 1, not 2, all 3. But they have to show improvements. And that the magnitude of those improvements have to be huge. So, I mean, this is not a whim. This is not a group average. This is within that person. They have to show that they have been able to induce, not just attenuate declines, but show improvements enough to offset what you would expect declines to be in 10, 15, or 20 years in that measure. And so this cannot be a fluke. Our advisors put this together with us to do this in a way that's really conducive to how these might be adopted in clinic. And for us to de-risk those really large regulatory facing phase 3 trials, is that by this paradigm, if you show that you have a large proportion of responders across those categories at those age levels, you have a blockbuster on your hand that could fundamentally change the way we age. And so this is the goal. So that's, again, the goal is we're asking our teams to have a therapeutic, either alone or in combination, some approach or solution that they're going to use to improve muscle, cognitive, and immune function, and that these have to be demonstrated in people. And so these are clinical trials of 1 year. And
That's
so
fantastic.
It's huge. It is very rigorous.
I mean, let me ask, was there a 4th category that you seriously entertained including?
There were several. So, oh my gosh, when I came in, Tom, I wanted like 9 to 12. categories included, not just those.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that
there's
we made a strong decision to be very parsimonious in our selection. And so we went down from my suggested 9 to 12 categories.
one for each hallmark of aging or something like that, right?
Yeah, so we'd approached it that way. I was really going on a systems
Hmm.
approach. So I wanted,
Hmm.
hormonal balance. I wanted kidney function. I wanted bone health. I wanted, certainly our immune markers were still in there, muscle and cognitive were still in there, but I had a host of other things that I really wanted. And I also wanted some like a biologic aging, a molecular level measure. And I lost. So
Oh, you lost, but you may have won.
and cardiovascular function. So I wanted to make this, and that you would have to demonstrate, like you select which ones you wanted out of this, right? So you had to show in 8 of 12 or 7 of 12, something like that. And I lost because they were right. This is one of the great things about being a scientist and as leaders that I also have to listen, is that where scientifically it may make a lot of sense, is that it can be really difficult to interpret, difficult to judge, and even more difficult for people at home that might take on the risk of trying a novel therapeutic, is that, it really needs to mean something for them and to have some demonstrated and salient response. And so if we talk to people who are aging, and that there's been some really great work done in focus groups by my old group that I worked with at Wake Forest University School of Medicine, led by Steve Krachevsky, they did some really nice focus group work in trying to define aging outcomes. And if you talk to people about what they want the most, is that, they realize they can manage their blood sugar. They can manage chronic cardiovascular diseases too, high blood pressure, that stuff. But the things that make a difference in daily life are really function-based.
Yeah.
We want to maintain our physical abilities, whether that's to be able to exercise, walk the dog, walk to cross this crosswalk in time without getting hit by a car, walking the grocery store or mall or whatever it may be, so that that you can maintain, play with grandkids, getting up and down off the ground. And so there are some basic functional elements that are there. And then 2, there is a very deep fear of loss of cognitive function. So not even just Alzheimer's disease, but the myriad of things leading up to that, sort of in the subclinical categories, that Alzheimer's disease is the ultimate fear. But again, sort of remaining cognitively intact, memory intact, and really important within that is this thing we call executive functioning, right? So the ability to multitask in a sense, right? So can I keep my grocery list in one hand while talking to my grandson while in the grocery store? And that there's a lot of balancing of multiple tasks and inputs that have to come in. And those are really high level tasks that can slow down the processing needed for those. Yeah. And so really looking at things that are sort of in this fluid cognition world, that are really intimately important to people. And so again, so that's muscle, that's cognition. And then the other thing that we learned through pandemic that was so important was around immune function, is that if we don't have the inherent resilience in our system to be able to leave our house and interact, we're at a real loss. And so, looking at these aging approaches as, how do we get ready in case there is the next pandemic? And that it's not just building the next vaccine to target that virus. We call it host-directed therapy. So what do we do for the person to build resilience? And that we know that that's sort of a fundamental thing that's lost when we age. And so we felt that it was really important to capture that resilience factor, and that we chose to do this through immune function. And so really important too is that these are key pillars that we can prize for improvements over 1 year, but they're related to a new thing that's coming out within the field that's getting huge traction. Started in France, actually started with the WHO, World Health Organization, now has really great demonstration in France and others of looking at this sort of this fundamental thing called intrinsic capacity. And so that also includes, vision and other sort of neuropsych areas, and also emotional health, loneliness, well-being, depression kind of factors. And so for us, we couldn't go for this whole intrinsic capacity because we needed to show improvements with discrete measures over time. But that still is very much like a centering thing that I think the field is really wrapping around right now. So again, hugely important. That's a much longer answer than you needed, but obviously it's an area
That's a good answer. It's a good answer.
Very deeply about. And the
Yeah.
cool thing from France is that what they have been showing is that by screening for intrinsic capacity in older adults and using that as a trigger for therapeutic approaches, whether this is at a public health level, additional screening, more work done, they're finally showing at a population level, by looking at this and factoring this around aging, is that you can actually make a population level difference in health and health span, simply by looking and really targeting and aging around these sort of functional domains. So I feel really good about where we ended with this, even though not all of my measures got included. We ended up with this sort of a prizable way that's salient and is now getting some backing from population level.
Well, you jokingly say that you lost. I suspect that you won, and I think that we all won.
Yeah.
By focusing on functional restoration. I think as Peter sometimes called it, right? You got to choose something that you can actually restore and measure the restoration.
We did. And the measurement part for us ended up being one of those critical factors, right? And so skin was in there too, by the way. Skin was one of our, when we whittled it down to all four, is that, Peter has this, you want to looking good and feeling good kind of thing. And so skin was in there, but we actually ended up back and forth. That was a big back and forth with our advisors. It ended up leaving simply because we didn't know that the metrics were there, that we could measure it in sort of a tangible way. And it didn't really have some of that functional capacity that we were looking for that some of the other ones did. Not to say that it's not important. Skin is an incredibly important organ for health, is that it's not just the thing that's for looking good, but it's a barrier defense. It does really important things for us. It's both a target organ and could be a really valuable endpoint. But for a prize, right? When we're looking at prizes, we have to have these prizable, measurable, judgeable endpoints that we feel good about, that we can measure, we can standardize. And skin was one that some of our advisors said, oh gosh, I don't think we want to go into being the Botox police for a global competition. And that there was just some challenges, or to do skin biopsies. That felt like that was a procedure that might have been a little bit too invasive for a global competition. So, so we made some choices and we ended up with the three.
I think you made a beautiful, parsimonious, to use your word, choice. Beautiful choice. And it does stand to reason that if your muscles are in good shape, if your brain is in good shape, and if your immune system is in good shape, so you're not getting sick, you may not live forever, but you're doing pretty darn well. You're doing pretty darn well. And so, and also, I can't help but be impressed by the magnitudes. The lower threshold is 10-year improvement, and the higher threshold, the stretch, is 20-year.
Oh, so you don't, Tom, you don't know the fight we've had.
Well, I mean, coming up with the right magnitude has got to be really tricky, right?
Oh, yeah. So I am a practical scientist and I design trials. And when you design clinical trials, we do something where when you design a trial, you look for something called power, right? Is that you need your trial to be powered, and that you do this like on 90% power, at the lowest end, maybe 85, but we power everything around 90, which means you want to be 90% certain that you're going to hit that result with this number of subjects that you enroll. I had to get schooled. So again, me, conservative, trialist person, did not apply to prize.
But you're on the side of, let's go with 2% gain or something like that.
I was like five.
Yeah. Okay.
5 years across 3. Boom, fireworks, amazing. And
and to your defense, in that position, that would be an extraordinary population level event.
It would be an extraordinary change. Right. And then I did my calculations. I used, like, as an example, exercise on one of our target measures of VO2 max. So if you take people who are 60 and older that are previously sedentary and you do an exercise intervention, 9 months, there's been this huge, beautiful meta-analysis. I wish I knew the first author. I should quote them. It's a lovely study. So they pulled together all these different clinical trials, and they showed that in this population set, that you could get VO2 max improvements, because again, this is part of our prize design. This is also where those 3 measures come in. We're not talking about how do you slow the gain, slow down the decline. Like, you can get an improvement in this measure. in less than a year, about 9 months to 12 months, of I think it was anywhere 16 to 18% in sedentary. Okay, so that's an improvement of a huge percentage. That percentage improvement is actually, that's the amount to offset that 15 to 20 year decline. And so I looked at that and I was like, okay, that's defensible, but that's one measure with one approach.
Yeah.
That's not even going to help your muscle power. That's not going to help your muscle mass. That's going to do nothing. Maybe do something for cognition. I don't know what it's going to do for immune, but you're probably not going to get those same targets. So me, conservative scientist, said, okay, 10 years is crazy talk, Peter. We're not. And Peter really was great. And so again,
he's got his massive transformative purpose, right? You got to go for it.
Exactly. And he told me, if that's where your conservative start is, he said that I'm going to push you. We're going to double it. We're going to go to 20 years as the
Sounds like Peter. Sounds like
it's a total Peter. And so we fought and we fought and we fought. I wanted 5 to 10. He wanted, 10 at the starting, 20 at the finish. He wanted all 20 to begin with. And so we agreed to disagree. We took it back to our sponsors, and our sponsors were sort of graded in the middle and said, Mahmood Khan, who's the CEO of Evolution.
Yep.
I have the most love in the world for that man. He is amazing. So he was a great partner to us. He actually was really involved in the development process. He is a very strategic thinker. He does tend to be conservative. He's very thoughtful, but he's also decisive. And so he listened to this. He was like, okay, great. Let's grade down the award. He said, I agree. He was also in the camp. He's like, 20 years is crazy, Peter, but we can put it out there at 20. You could always work it down, but you can't make it harder. And so that was where we agreed. I said, okay, well, 10 years for me is crazy. That's so far beyond where we are now. He said, okay, that's the starting point. And then we do the reach goal out to 20. And so you, Tom, you have no idea. The fight arguments, I would come in with all of this data and I would show it and they'd say, yeah, that's for trials. This is a competition. And it is. It's just a totally different mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, fantastic. I absolutely see where you're coming from. And 10 years alone seems like a massive goal, much less 20. And don't get me wrong, no one would be happier than me to see that goal met and exceeded. But there is the other side of me that says, well, what if nobody does that across all 3 categories in 7 years? What do you do then?
My favorite conversation. Thank you. So I've had, I've had drug developers and a few other people come to me. They're like, look, we've got some stuff in our pipeline. Maybe, we've been working on this thing for Alzheimer's disease. It looks like it may have some cool effects for cognition earlier on, like before you get to Alzheimer's or like brain aging. And they're coming to us and they're like, so what if we do this and we test it using your paradigm, we couple it with this other thing. And what if we show cognitive effects of 20 years, but we don't hit immune or muscle at those levels? Like, is there an extra, do we get like a minor payout? And my comment to them has been, historically, if you have a drug, a compound, an approach that can change cognitive function in persons who don't yet have Alzheimer's disease, that you can sort of roll back the functional clock by 20 years, congratulations, you have a blockbuster and you do not need our money. You are making millions and beyond, but it will ultimately go to our judges. So, that's my funny answer to it, which is totally true and is based on historical evidence from 30 years of XPrize history, is that often the biggest commercial success in these prizes, it's not often the winner.
Yeah.
It's usually somebody who makes it to the finals, who has.
And I think I get your broader point that even in failure, there can be extraordinary success.
Incredible success.
Right?
Incredible success. But at the same time, it ultimately goes to our judges. So I have an incredible judging panel. Right now, their names are under lock and key until they finish their first round judging, because we don't magically want gift baskets to show up at their house or sales pitches to come sort of sprinkling in. So they are, I have a masked judging panel now. I can tell you that they are global experts and they're doing their job. And that judging panel will stay with us. Many of them will be with us for 7 years. Many of them signed up to be judges because they are intimately involved in doing this work in threshold setting. And so, they are the ones who are empowered to look at what us and our advisors put together as a structure, and that they can look at the teams that are going through, and they have the ultimate authority to make that call at the end to say, okay, they didn't hit this response threshold, but they hit 2 out of 3 at this 15-year mark, and they missed this one because it was like at an 8-year, 5-year, that the magnitude was just shy. It's ultimately their discretion to say, this meets my minimum standard, that I would feel confident in standing up and say that has targeted aging in a meaningful way that will revolutionize human health. It's their call. And that they take that decision back to our sponsors, who can then decide if they want to make subawards and how that happens. So it's never a no.
Yep.
And that I have, and my job was to find the right people to be on that panel who care deeply about this space, who are going to be rigorous, who are going to be honest, but who know that the importance for the field.
That's great. Well, I look forward to learning who these judges actually are. And of course, seeing what they come up with over the years. We'll definitely talk at the end around how people can keep in touch with all of this. But before we do you mind if I kind of go into something that's perhaps a little more focused on kind of my background and what my business does?
Please, of course, love to.
So, I do not expect that you know this. That's fine. But you may know that our research has focused a lot on epigenetics. Right? As a key technology for expanding lifespan and health span going forward.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure you're aware of a lot of the peer-reviewed studies showing that one model of aging shows that it really can be described as the loss of the epigenetic signature of our cells over time. In essence, our cells forgetting who they want to be, stopping doing things they should do, starting doing things they shouldn't do. You get inflammation, you get aging, etc. It's also at the center of what we view as kind of identifying appropriate behavioral and medical interventions by using epigenetic testing to identify biological age. And once, of course, you have that measure of biological age, you can do all kinds of interventions and say, well, which of these interventions now have the largest impact on biological age, and what can be measured, can be optimized. And because 3/4 of us are dying from cancer and stroke and heart disease and all these non-communicable diseases, which are largely or have been proven to be a function of behavioral and other medical interventions, figuring out the right interventions for the right people is really quite key.
It is.
So I know you know all that stuff, but my somewhat selfish question to you is, do you have a view for the role or potential role of epigenetics in longevity extension?
Sure. So I'm going to answer this, and I'm going to be a little bit cagey.
Please do, because there's all kinds of things out there, right?
Right.
And
Exactly.
you must be neutral. I understand you must be neutral.
And I'm incredibly neutral. So I can say, epigenetics is, of course, one of the pillars and hallmarks of aging. So any kind of epigenetic alterations, whether those are histone modifications or you're looking at, methylation patterns, whatever it may be. So absolutely an essential component of human aging. I don't think there's a major question there. Then the next is how it's applied. Steve Horvath, of course, the grandfather of, and Steve, I'm sorry, I don't mean grandfather.
He's not that old.
Grandfather, you're not that old, and you're an amazing scientist, and you have really sparked a lot of work in this area that has been demonstrated, across species, across cell types in different ways, that there is this epigenetic signature statistically and biologically. The question for us is, that's a different, I'm not going to go there yet. So that's one portion, right? And so looking at this as some sort of underlying biologic signal that some call it a clock, some don't. It's a signature. We're going to go with that for now. And that's one piece. Next is that you're looking at epigenetics as both, a lead indicator, but then also a target for therapeutics. Right. That same process is intervenable in some meaningful way, as you were talking about being able to sort of reprogram back. Right.
Mhm.
So that's a really big, really hot area right now. I don't think anyone needs to say that's been an amazing investments in that space.
And specifically, you're talking about epigenetic reprogramming now, right?
Epigenetic and cellular reprogramming, exactly
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And so that this is an area of really great interest. And so do we see some teams coming in with that? You betcha. And so the question is sort of where they are in their translational pipeline about when these can be demonstrated.
Yeah.
And so that's another area, right? So that's there. And so those two components really, really important for the field, very essential. And then
Actually, excuse me, can I stop you just for a second here, just to make it clear to our audience what we're talking about with epigenetic
please
reprogramming?
do, yes.
I mean, many years ago now, was it? I want to say 2007. That could be wrong, but Yamanaka did his studies
Mhm,
identifying that you can produce pluripotent stem cells from skin cells.
mhm. That's it.
And so that's fundamentally resetting the biological clock, bringing a cell from a full somatic cell that's already fully differentiated into its pluripotent state right at the beginning. So if you can turn the clock all the way back, couldn't you turn it just part of the way back, right? And I think that's the promise of epigenetic reprogramming. Is there a way to reset? And there's so much that's been done on that.
There
That
really has
cells do have a memory for what their original fully differentiated
Yeah.
status was. So anyway, really exciting area. And I think many of us think that if there's a single solution long term that has a big potential impact, it could be something like that.
Right, right. And so, and
Mhm.
there's a huge amount of work in that field right now. My
Mhm.
goodness, Altos Labs, major investments, individual labs, other consortia coming out. I mean, it's a very exciting space. And of course, the nuance there is right is trying to titrate it just right. Right? Is that for those playing along at home? Those Yamanaka factors, there were 4 of them.
Yep.
They're locally known as OSKM. Those are the 4 factors. Each letter goes to 1.
Yeah.
The M part of that component is
More
unknown, sort of,
carcinogenic
tumor driving
compound.
factor, right? Is that
Yeah.
there's a certain state. If you take them back too far, it's not necessarily good. And so there's been so much work on figuring out what we consider this partial reprogramming.
Yeah.
That can you pulse those different transcription factors, those epigenetic marks, right? And try to titrate back that clock so that it's not cancer inducing, but could still be transformative. And there really are remarkable companies, groups, research networks doing outstanding work in that space. And I think we're all watching with bated breath right now for things to replicate
Yeah.
and develop. So that is an area and an application. Next is, so we talked about, that there is sort of this intrinsic clock thing, that there is that's an underlying biologic feature of aging, right, around epigenetics. Then you have the therapeutic development. And then there's the other part about it as biomarkers, right? Hugely important. Who do you intervene on when and how do you know your interventions worked? And so those are the spaces that, we have chosen in this competition to not pick a side. And we did this very intentionally. And so if the team's coming in, there are 2 big areas in therapeutic development of aging, huge importance. One is the therapeutic itself. 2 is the population. Who do you intervene in, when, and why? And so we're inviting our teams, and we did not dictate to them how they're doing their selection. Could be a patient population, as long as they're stable. It could be generally aging. It could be, anything there. We invite people to figure out what they need to do. But I, would strongly advised is figuring out some biologic or functional feature that help predict risk so that you can actually show that there's an improvement and sort of who you're intervening in and why.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where, whether you're looking at epigenetics or some other sort of biologic mechanism or clock feature, and I hate to use clock, some other biologic marker or measure of aging that could be used to show that you're at a higher risk. Maybe you're the ideal person that, if you could figure out which therapeutic to come in with at that time, could show really huge change. And then again, the next part is is it intervenable? So can you show that it changes in response to an intervention? And so maybe this is that same biologic marker that you're using to figure out who to intervene in, but maybe not. But maybe
Yeah.
you want to track something early on, maybe once a month, once every 3 months, every 6 months, whatever it is, to show that some biologic feature is moving sort of in the right direction of change so that I could feasibly expect function to improve, or a change in a health condition, or some other health event that's indicative of a change in health span. And so those become, again, those lead indicators, those measures of success that you need to have in advance of that clinical outcome. And so we're seeing people play with them across all different spaces within aging. And they're areas for innovation that are equally as important as figuring out the therapeutic.
Yep. Yep. Well, we are so excited to see what everybody comes up with, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this human contest that you've created is going to put epigenetics out there with everything else, and everyone's going to do their best job to try and help us live longer. And again, we're waiting with bated breath to kind of see what happens. But we're going to have to wait a little while, right? Because it's a 7-year prize. But can you tell us about kind of the milestones and things that we all can look for along the way?
Absolutely right. So yes, so 7 years is an awfully long time, but there is so much happening in advance of that. And so at our first round, that's where we are now. Again, I have my judges who are going in. This is very much like deciding the Pope. We've given them the applications. They're doing their reviews. They're all going into this judging summit in March. They go into a room together. I'm not even allowed in the room because I'm an executive director. I can interact with the teams. I'm out doing things. I help create the guidelines. I don't get to help judge. Not my job. I set it all up for them. They go into their room. They do their judging. I stand outside the door, this time probably literally, and wait, for the smoke signal.
I was going to go to smoke. What is going to come out of that room, right?
Exactly right. Is that, as I said, I've read every page of every application. I've started extracting data because I'm just like you. I cannot wait to see what people are doing, what they're coming up with, how they're approaching this, because they are shaping the field in real time. And it's awesome.
And learn in real time,
yeah, it's just so cool. So, even at this early stage, is that there's so much that can come out of this. And so, again, our judges are going to select those top 40 teams. Other teams they'll designate as qualified, still pass through. So they're still in the competition. They just don't get the first awarding.
Yep.
Those top 40 teams, we have a moment with them in New York City in May that we have an award ceremony where they're recognized. Day 2 is really important in this awards event. Day 2 is that there's an investor summit. So like I said, we drive capital to innovation. And we do this in the structure of a prize. And we do this very literally by bringing investors, funders, philanthropists, and put them in the same room with our teams. All of our qualified teams go in a lookbook to those investors and funders so that we can at least stand in the back and try to do a matchmaking service. XPrize makes no money on this, by the way. We run the competitions and we put people together to make it happen. So any of those connections happens directly between that funder, investor, VC group and the team. And that we hope, regardless of the outcome of the competition, that they are both successful and develop fruitful relationships.
Yeah, but yet another example of succeeding even before you win.
Absolutely. Is that, if we do nothing else but help somebody raise their next round, hallelujah. Keep going and keep developing and aging. Would love it. So those teams then, all of our qualified teams are invited to go on and they do what we call a semifinals round. And so if they have not already done clinical trials, they start clinical trials. It's basically a 1-year buffer or run-in period to allow our teams to get set up and get running. Is that there's a lot that can happen in the way to go from lab to clinic. Not just sort of, slight barriers to cross, but I'm like Grand Canyon level barriers. If somebody has never tested in humans and needs to find a partner and is putting their regulatory paperwork in for the first time, there's so much that can happen in this great big valley of death between the two canyon walls. And so we give a year to do that, which in the clinical trial world is 0 time. So like a very tall order. At the end of that in 2026, teams will we get this next flood of submissions and applications where they have to submit to us some clinical data to show that they're in trials. They give us some likely biomarker results so they can sort of figure out what their little lead indicators are as they're going, that they can describe how they're going to recruit their people. And give us some evidence that that works, right? So if they're doing epigenetic biomarkers as a screening criteria, show us that you can do it in real time and that that's going to be a strategy that works. Fabulous. And so then we'll have that next round where we look at all of those. We'll do another full landscape analysis to show where the field is, how we've advanced in 1 year and where people are. And we'll also do another investor summit. So again, putting the funders and the teams back together. We give out that $10 million award. And so that's 2026. So we have a couple of follow-along periods this year. Next year, we want people to meet the teams. We want to get them maximum coverage. We want people to see what's out there and really build the field. And then they start those trials. That becomes a slightly quieter period while they're out doing the work. We'll have snapshots. We invite people. Things are happening. But we have a bit of a wait while they conduct those trials until we can get the results in and release towards the end of that prize period. There's still plenty of opportunity for people to follow along, to get involved. For folks that are listening at home, once we start announcing where those teams are going forward, qualified teams and other, is we invite you to look for where those teams are. If there are some in your community, sign up for a trial. Volunteer, participate, get engaged, do something. There are so many ways to be part of this, either as a research participant, part of a newsletter, meeting the teams, that this is such a new field and it's growing, and that it's only going to grow if we get more people involved and really change public perception about what can happen with human aging.
Yeah. Well, I want to participate. I'm sure that a large number of the followers of the Human Life Expectancy channel will want to participate.
Great.
In short, Jamie, I thank you so much for your time here and all of this. You've been tremendously generous. Thanks to you, thanks to Peter, thanks to all the great people at XPrize who have sponsored this wonderful competition to really help us all live longer, healthier lives.
Yeah, have huge thanks to give out. I mean, this was done by a village. I've alluded to it. I get to be the person on stage while everyone behind me does huge amounts of work with us, from our teams to our 20 panel advisors, to our judges who are working behind the scenes, to all of our prize partners and listeners. It has been a community in action, which is, again, why we do this. The only way it gets built.
That's great. Again, congratulations on a fantastic prize. We will absolutely be watching, and I'd love the opportunity to chat with you again as the process goes along. May we?
Absolutely. Please follow along with me and be sure to look out for those announcements when they come out in May. I'm sure that there are many teams out there that would also love to be engaged. And, we, again, really encourage this. This is meant to be a public and open space.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Jamie.
Sure. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.